So for years now, I have been telling stories about video games, mainly Call of Duty, which is a military-based shooter, but as we know, sometimes it kind of goes off the deep end. However, recently a new game came out with a campaign. You may have heard it, it's called Delta Force. Now, this campaign is interesting because it's based in reality, it's based off of a true story, and there's been tons of movies, documentaries, and a ton of media put out about this specific battle. So I wanted to branch out and try something a little bit different, telling you not just the story of the real life story, but also the story of the movies, as well as the video game. Now, if you don't know what this mission is, very few probably know it as the Battle of Mogadishu, but many of you, if not all, probably know it as Black Hawk Down. Now, the Battle of Mogadishu lasted for less than 24 hours, but there was a lot that led up to it. So first, I need to give you a little bit of backstory. Going back to the year 1991, 2 years before the event, it marked the collapse of the Somali Democratic Republic. And all of a sudden, there was a civil war going on. And because of this civil war, pretty much everyone in the area had a gun, or many guns, or RPGs, or there was a lot going on with weapons there. And basically, everyone in the region was choosing one of two leaders. Mohammed Farad Adid, that's the one you probably heard of, and Ali Mahdi Mohammed. So we'll call them Ali and Adid. People were choosing one of the two sides. And because of this civil war, people in the area started to starve. So in the year 1992, something happened by the name of Operation Restore Hope. And at this time, about 1,800 US Marines tried to help the people alongside the UN to feed the Somalians. This was good for a short period of time until the US started to target specifically Adid's side of the civil war. They were clearly choosing one side over the other, which meant half the people in Somalia were all of a sudden mad at the Americans. Because of this, the US start going after some of Adid's generals. And on July 12th, 1993, the US sent an airstrike on one of Adid's security chiefs. Then they brought in helicopters and started firing like crazy. And this attack killed 73 Somali dignitaries. Now, obviously, this made the Somalis even more mad at the Americans. This continued into September of 1993, where the Americans kept on raiding places, looking for Adid and looking for his generals. But they were unsuccessful, and all of these raids, once again, increased the anger of the Somalis, making the entire area essentially a powder keg ready to explode with anger. On both sides, the Americans and the Somalis, and as the frustration grew, this led us into October 3rd, 1993. Now, currently in the area, you had the UN forces, you had the American forces, which specifically consisted of US Army Rangers and Delta Force. Now, this day just so happened to be a Sunday, which meant it was the day off. Soldiers went to the beach, they were relaxing, trying to call their families, when all of a sudden, new orders came in. The time was 13:30. A new raid came in and they were going after two high-ranking lieutenants for Adid. Now, these lieutenants were going to be in a building that was close to something by the name of the Olympic Hotel in the Baccarat Market. Now, they knew where they were going because they had essentially an inside man driving down the street with some black tape on the roof of his car, and they were kind of overwatching him as he moved through the streets. When he got to the area, he got out of the car, opened up the hood, and they knew where they were moving in. They had some Rangers dropping in on the roof, others coming in Black Hawk helicopters and dropping into the streets and setting up a perimeter around the area. That was the plan, and it began at 1540. This is when the first helicopter landed in the Baccarat Market. Now, moving in, they immediately knew something was off. Tires were on fire and there was big black smoke billowing out across the entirety of Mogadishu. This was a warning telling the Somalians that the Americans were coming. And upon getting there at 1540, immediately bullets and RPGs start flying, and at one point, one of the guys actually falls out of the helicopter, being brutally injured. However, the Rangers continue and they push into the target building, at this time everything going according to plan. This is when we get to 1600 hours. The target building is clear and the hostages are taken. This has been done incredibly quickly within 20 minutes. However, one problem. The ground convoy had not yet arrived. The ground convoy was coming in to take in the hostages and anyone who'd been injured and move them back to the airstrip, which is the area that the US Army had staged. Now, because the convoy had to fight their way to the target building, eventually the convoy gets there and is detained. However, they're a little bit late. Took about 20 more minutes, leading us to 1620.
I repeat, Super 6-1, going down. We got a Black Hawk down. We got a Black Hawk down.
Now, all of a sudden, the Rangers and Delta Force go from being on the offensive to now running a rescue mission. Dead or alive, there is no man left behind. However, they're racing against the clock because at this point, the Somalis are trying to get to the helicopter as the Rangers are trying to get to the helicopter. Now, at this time, some of the convoy started to pick up the casualties and take them back to base. So we'll call this group the casualty convoy. The casualty convoy is carrying wounded, injured, and even deceased soldiers back to the airstrip, and they are forced to go back the way they came. However, they just keep running into one convoy after the other, and soldiers are getting shot out of the gunner positions, and things just aren't going very well. So then you have the crash site and the rescuers. So immediately upon the helicopter crashing, the helicopter is surrounded by Somalis. At the same time, Delta Force and Rangers now team up and are making their way on foot towards the crash site. And upon getting there, they find out that 2 pilots are dead and the others have gotten out of the chopper. But upon getting to the chopper and trying to rescue everyone, they quickly realize that they are overwhelmed. They are completely surrounded and need backup. This is when they radio for the next crew. We're going to call these guys the rescue convoy. So we have the casualty convoy going back to the airstrip, we have the crash site with Rangers making their way on foot, and then we finally have the rescue convoy who is getting directions radioed to them by a chopper as to where to go to get to crash site 1. We'll get to that in a second. But the problem is the radio instructions are getting there late, giving them the wrong directions, and they are constantly being shot at, to the point where they actually have to abandon the mission and get themselves sent back to the airstrip as, I guess, now the second casualty convoy, because so many of them have taken injuries, their vehicles are getting destroyed, and they can't find their way to the crash site. So they go back to the airstrip as well. All the while, there are 2 more Blackhawks up in the air, Super 62 and Super 64. This brings us to 1640. That's right, this has only been 20 more minutes. Now, it is at this time when the second chopper, Super 64, gets hit. The helicopter crashes, but the problem is, this helicopter is about 20 blocks away from crash site number 1, which means they are completely alone, completely stranded, with no one there to help them. However, there is one other chopper up in the air by the name of Super 62. They radio to command that they want to go in and rescue whoever is left alive in Super 64. However, they get denied over and over and over again, till about 15 to 20 minutes later. We will get there, but before we do, we have to go to 1650, just 10 minutes later. It's at this time that Mike Durant wakes up in the helo of Super 64 crashed. He looks around and sees everyone injured, and he is immediately attacked by Somalis. He defends them off, all the while Super 62 is begging to get dropped down to help out Mike Durant. And after 15-20 minutes of begging, they are finally allowed to go down and help out. And upon getting there, they are able to defend the position for a while before being overtaken by Somalis. But the strange thing is Mike Durant was left alive and taken as a POW. Now, it is throughout this entire time that at Crash Site 1, firefights are going on, bullets are flying, RPGs are flying, things have gone crazy, and they are completely set in a defensive position, running out of water, running out of bullets, just trying to stay alive. All the while, someone by the name of Jamie Smith is shot in the leg and bleeding out from a femoral artery. Now, at this time, the medic is trying to reach inside his leg, pinch off the vein, and try to save his life. But as we find out, it doesn't go according to plan.
What are you doing?
You did all you could here.
They should have sent the medevac.
You did all you could here.
Should have sent a medevac.
More men would get torn up. Right now, we'd be out there defending another crashed chopper.
You got your men this far. You did it right today. Need to start thinking about getting these men out of here.
Listen up!
So while our soldiers are trying to survive, the US Army is trying to figure out a way to get some help to the Americans. So they request help from the people that they're helping, the UN. However, the way that the UN was working at the time was a little bit strange, where they said they would only work basically a 9-to-5 job. They wouldn't work weekends. It was very difficult to actually get the help, but eventually they do. From the Pakistani Mountain Division, they bring in a rescue convoy of vehicles, which end up arriving at 1:55 a.m. The entire time, this firefight has been raging on throughout the night. Several times they get strafing runs to come in, explosions going off, RPGs going off, but at 1:55, the rescue convoy makes it to the crash site. And at this point, they start extracting the helicopter, because when they say no man left behind, they don't just mean living, they also mean the dead. So as they are loading wounded and dead into the convoy, they realize that the vehicles are getting incredibly full. And at this point, at 5:42 in the morning, the sun is starting to rise, and they have packed everything up and blown up the Black Hawk helicopter, so the Somalis aren't able to get anything from the inside. This is when the Humvees start moving out. But because the vehicles are so full of wounded and so full of dead soldiers, the remaining walking soldiers are unable to get in the vehicles. Because of this, they are left to run, something they're calling the Mogadishu Marathon. As they fight the remaining Somalis, and there was a ton of them, they are working their way down the path, the way that they had worked into this location, trying to get to the stadium that is outside the Mogadishu border, and really outside of Adid's domain. But they make it back to the stadium, and eventually make it back to the airstrip. Now, there were several questions leading into this mission as to what exactly went wrong or right, depending on how you look at it. But the one thing that we can say is throughout this, 18 Americans were left dead, 84 wounded, and the numbers are unknown, but between 300 and 500 Somalis were dead and 1,000 plus wounded. It was a massive battle, not even lasting a full 24 hours, but nothing really came of it. Shortly after this, remember how I said Mike Durant was taken POW? It was the next day, on October 4th, that a hostage tape was sent to America.
That if anything happens to them, the United States will view this matter very gravely.
Now, it was 10 days after this, on October the 14th, that they came to an agreement. The Red Cross was sent in to save Mike Durant. He was released from Adid's custody, and with that, the United States pulled out of Somalia. There was a ceasefire, Americans completely withdrawing, and many within the Rangers were mad because they wanted revenge for what happened to them, what happened to their friends, the death of the Americans. But with the ceasefire, Mike Durant was let free. Here's the thing, and here's what's crazy. 2 years later, in 1995, Adid declared himself the president of Somalia. no election, anything like that, just said, hey, I'm president. The opposing clan rejected it, and he was shot by an opposing clanman 1 year-ish later. Now, that didn't end the civil war. There's still two clans going at each other within Somalia to this day. But just like that, the Adid reign that the Americans were so worried about was completely gone. Now, what's strange about the Battle of Mogadishu is technically it came at a time of peace. It was slightly after the Gulf War. It wasn't during a world war, yet is an incredibly brutal and bloody battle that took place in such a short period of time. This mission was only supposed to last 30 minutes. They were supposed to be home quickly for dinner, but it turned into an absolute nightmare. Now, interestingly enough, with that civil war still raging on, one of the quotes that the movie used is, "Only the dead have seen the end of war," which is extremely fitting for a battle that still rages on. But one of my favorite moments came at the very end of the campaign within the Black Hawk Down video game. And it was the line that may war only ever be in video games.